Hello. Tonight I wanted to do two reviews of two books. One is Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, and the other is Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. Seems a bit incongruous, but I am doing this review because these two books have been compared to one another by several prominent personnel, like I said, from several different backgrounds. And I thought, and including people who are, I would say, radio hosts, one of those being Gary Null here in New York, who's on WBAI-FM, and other prominent persons have compared these two books together, saying that one is equivalent or similar to the other. Well, before I wrote the book, I figured I would read these two books, get a better idea of what each author was thinking when they did these books, as well as try to present this to the audience. Now, first thing, get out of the way, I am not a scholar of any kind. I'm not writing a doctrinal thesis on race or anything of that sort. I just was concerned because I thought that the two books were a bit incongruous. So I will take the time to describe each of the books and kind of give you my opinion as to say what each books may have similarities, and you yourself can comment on the video at a later date and give your opinions. I basically was kind of opening this up to a more of a free-form discussion, and if there's good discussion and intelligent discussion, then perhaps we can have some idea where this may be going. First, I have to say I read Mein Kampf. It was the first book I did read. It is a rather difficult read. The book is well over 600 pages. And of course, it was written in the 1920s by Adolf Hitler during his period in time when he was in prison after the failed beer hall putsch attempt in the 1930s to establish the fascist party in Germany. Now, as I said beforehand, the book itself has a very, very interesting introduction. That introduction is pretty much an accurate way of describing the book itself. The book is very, very difficult to read, as I said, because because Hitler moves from subject to subject. Of course, he is obsessed in the book with Jews. He, dare I would say, does announce that he is an anti-Semite, so we got that out of the way, that he is a racist. He does not have any love for Jewish people at all. Pretty much doesn't have any love for anyone. But needless to say, I wanted to make sure that when I was reading this book that I tried to understand what his thinking was at the time and why he would come to these conclusions, at least regarding Germany. What I did find funny, and I did find this rather peculiar when reading the book, as I took my time reading this book, was that he mentions things in the book as talking about the Ostmark in Germany, or I should say in Austria, because he was born in Austria and he is an Austrian citizen. He also does not like the, there's another thing also, he does not like the Austrian monarchy. When I was reading the book, I also was rather surprised to find out how much disdain he had for people in Austria and for his time in Vienna. But again, like I said, the book itself is very, very difficult to read because he'll jump from one subject to another, and I didn't really found it rather confusing at times. However, the only time where he is cogent in the book is when he describes the four aspects of German policy. Now that is in and of itself rather odd because he is describing German imperialism, especially from the period based after Bismarck. And he also, after, in this case, the establishment of the Reich, which was done in 1870. Now, of the First Reich, which was done in 1870. This was after the Napoleonic Wars and specifically after the Franco-Prussian War. He doesn't really mention that, which I also found that peculiar. This is another thing that's very, very difficult with the book because he's ahistorical, and that I did find. But in the 4 German aspects of policy, he does talk about the acquisition of territory and land. And as you well know, most of the European powers previous to this period when he wrote the book have been discovering, dare I say that word, or exploring, that's another word also that's confusing, or settling other people's lands. Well, Hitler does not mention that being a good policy for Germany. That I did find that rather peculiar, especially when you consider that Germany had colonies in Africa, specifically Togo and Namibia, and the policies that they implemented led to starvation, as well as in the case of Namibia, extermination of the Piharo and Namo peoples there inside the country, actually establishing what later would be classified as concentration camps. This is another thing that Hitler does not mention in his book, so it's ahistorical regarding this perspective. However, it is meant to note, or to those who wish to note, that for a man who is a racist, you would think that he would have explored the history of German policy in Africa, or German colonial policy. He doesn't even mention it in the book. He just mentions it in passing. So I thought that was rather interesting and peculiar for a man who claims to be a lover of Germany. And if you are a racist and you subscribe to that, you would think he would praise the openly racist policies of the German colonial administration. Doesn't do that. And I found that to be very enlightening and interesting in and of itself. Furthermore, when reading the book, he also establishes that, and as I said, because he does not like anything dealing with Austria, he has a loathing for Austria and policy, and Austria, the empire, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he has a loathing for the Habsburgs, as well as anything dealing with that. His determination is to establish that. And I thought this was confusing as well, because you would think a man who would understood that Austro-Hungarian Empire had settled Magyar people from Eastern Europe are part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They're not all Germans. So it would be peculiar to understand that a citizen of the Austro-Hungarian Empire would loathe the policy of having multiple ethnicities or multiple ethnic groups within that same empire, because that's how the Austro-Hungarian Empire was. So it is, again, rather peculiar there. I thought for a citizen of the Austro-Hungarian Empire to loathe the ethnic composition of said empire. It would be the same thing if you had that here in the United States. There's multiple ethnic groups here, and it would be the same as if you hated ethnic Indians or things of the sort, or ethnic people in the United States, and then said, oh, I don't like these people, but they're here in the empire. Well, why are they here? This is another important facet to keep in mind of his hatred of Jews, because once again, the Jewish people in Germany were ethnically no different than the Germans that Hitler claimed to love. But then again, this is the flaw with all supremacist ideology. And again, I don't want to digress, but I want to stay strictly with the book. If you are reading this book, you will not find any historical data as well. He talks about Aryans, but never tells anybody where they came from, or speaks of who these Aryan people were, what their culture was like. He just describes things in very, very broad and almost as I said, broad and rather confusing terminology. So I didn't want to ramble on too much about that, because I thought the policy question, because this book is specifically dealing with the establishment of a, quote, solution to what he thought as a solution to either dealing with Marxism and Jews, as well as social democracy. That's another thing he also doesn't like. Parliaments, dare I say, he does not like that either. And the establishment of a single party state, or of, in this case,